Hello, everyone. My name is Pat Doherty, and I am going to be doing two presentations for you that will deal with helping you prepare your young scholars, your students, if they would like to apply to study at the university level in the United States. This first presentation is going to kind of deal more with the nuts and bolts of the process. You know, what type of language assessments might they need to concern themselves with, what type of academic assessments, letters of recommendation, et cetera. I'll go through my agenda in a moment, but then the second presentation will deal more with the culture of being a university student or a young scholar at university in the United States. So this first presentation is a little bit more practical in orientation. And then the second presentation will deal more with the culture that your young scholars, your students might need to be ready to encounter when they go and study in the United States. So let's begin now with the first presentation. And I've titled this, Preparing Your Students to Attend University in the United States. This is presentation one, Practical Matters. A little bit of an introduction of me. My name is Professor Patrick Doherty. Most of my young scholars, my students at AIU, where I teach at Akita International University, call me Dr. Pat. I am Dean of the Faculty of International Liberal Arts. I'm also head of the English for Academic Purposes program, among other things that I do here at the university. Let me talk a little bit about my background, because I think it's significant that you understand who I am and maybe some of my expertise or my experiences that might reflect in this presentation. I've been an educator for 34 years, so a long time, basically. I had 9 years of experience as a high school teacher in the United States. I taught a variety of subjects, and most of my experience was actually in Phoenix, Arizona, where I taught in a public high school. I taught social studies, I taught English, I had qualifications in ESL, English as a second language. Many of my young scholars, my students in the school where I taught, were the children of immigrants or were immigrants themselves, maybe primarily coming from Mexico, Latin America, but also from Eastern Europe, from Bosnia and different locations. So I had that experience as a high school teacher in the United States. I also, by the way, hold qualifications to be a principal in the United States as well as a superintendent, though I did not do that much administrative work when I was living in the United States earlier in my career. I had 5 years of experience as a high school teacher in Japan. I worked primarily in Himeji down in Hyogo-ken. And I was an exchange teacher, primarily part of the Phoenix and Himeji Sister City program. Excellent program, I might say. And I worked in local public high schools in Himeji as an English teacher. So I have that experience of being a teacher in Japanese high schools. I worked in 2 of them, actually, as well as being involved in the overall process of English education in a community in Japan. I've worked at universities for approximately 20 years. I've worked, well, and of course, I was adjuncting primarily in the United States at the university level. I taught history courses, particularly when I was teaching in the United States. I had interesting groups of students there, of scholars. I taught, you know, people who were coming back to get their college degree, as well as, you know, what you would consider to be the traditional age and group that might be getting their college degree. So when I say people coming back to, I mean, one thing I did was I was hired to teach, you know, police officers, people who were in their career, but they wanted to get a college degree. So, you know, I taught history courses to them for a local public university, actually my alma mater. And I've also worked in Japan, of course. I've been an educator at the university level for a number of years. Most recently, my time at Akita International University has been about 8 years now, going on 9. But I did teach at another university in Hyogo-ken for approximately almost 6 years. So I've had significant experience teaching and working in administration in Japanese universities. I also taught in the Middle East and was an administrator there. So I was working for a university system in the United Arab Emirates. And so I was in charge of education, basically graduate education for education programs. So I ran a master's degree program in educational administration, as well as a master's degree program in special needs education, as well as also teaching courses myself, etc. And then I worked in Bangladesh for a while, teaching for a university there, primarily teaching English, but creative writing in English. So I've had a varied career. I've been very privileged, I think, to have been able to teach in these different environments over the last 30 plus years. And it's something that I look back fondly. So anyway, I do have a lot of experience as an educator at different levels and in different countries. Now, my agenda, this presentation, I want to talk about U.S. university entrance requirements and some suggestions for success. So if you have a student who is interested in studying in the United States, how can you prepare him or her or them for this experience? And so this presentation, again, is a little bit more on the nuts and bolts, the practicalities of preparing. Okay, but I will offer some suggestions as we go along. I'm going to talk about application platforms. How do you apply for universities in the United States? We'll talk about application essays, about transcripts, about standardized test scores, language assessments that they might need to take or be aware of. Letters of recommendation, maybe you will be asked to give a letter of recommendation. And then resources for finding a suitable university or college. There are thousands of universities and colleges in the United States. So, preparing them also involves having them choose and find suitable programs for themselves, deciding what they want to study, deciding what part of the country maybe they want to go to, deciding the economics, like will they be able to afford to go to a private university, or will they be going to a public university? Will they be going to a community college? That's another thing I'll talk a little bit about. Resources for finding a suitable university or college is, I think, important. They need to do some research on their own and choose specifically a good set of universities and colleges that they can apply for. And then I'll, of course, talk about community colleges as an option to start. Okay? Just a little caveat here. There are approximately 5,300 universities and colleges in the United States. So requirements might vary, and then sometimes it can vary, significantly depending on the university or the college. For example, some community colleges might not even require an SAT or an ACT academic test prior to coming to the college. Others might allow you to come without a TOEFL score if you are going to enroll first in one of their language preparation programs. So all sorts of requirements can be different. It's essential that you encourage your student to do research. And generally, universities are very open about, what they require, how you go about the process, what their timelines are. So do the research online. Okay, let's start with online. There are all sorts of services out there, but I think the best thing is at the beginning, when I say services to help you find a university or that, but, often those can be cost prohibitive. So I encourage everyone to first take it upon themselves to do some research, kind of think about where they want to study, what they want to study, what their economic situations are, what their time situations are, and all sorts of other things to kind of find a good university or college for them. All right, so research. research, research. That's important. A few things before we begin. To help those students of yours who might be thinking of going abroad for their post-secondary education, whether it be for a full 4-year degree, for a 2-year program, maybe for language training at a university, all sorts of things. Ask these questions. Why do you want to study in the United States? What's motivating you? I mean, that might help them when they think about, okay, which university, which program should I apply for? What would you like to study? How long and for what credential? Do you want an associate's degree? Do you want a bachelor's degree? Do you, is there a certificate program you're interested in at a 4-year institution or maybe at a community college? If you're not sure what you want to study, first think about what problems in the world you would like to solve. Sometimes when kids don't know, like, oh, I don't know what I want to study, I don't know what I want to do. I often, instead of asking them like, okay, what do you think you want to do in the future? I think I encourage that you ask them instead, maybe, okay, what problems in the world would you like to solve? Because then it kind of focuses them a bit on the possibility of programs like, oh, I want to, help people who are homeless, or I want to, work with children, or I want to be involved in, working with art and things. This will help them think about their program, what they want to study. And then once you get what they want to study, you can find programs then that fit all the things I've talked about. Their economic level, maybe their academic acuity, their test scores and things, and you can kind of then help guide them, or they can guide themselves. So once they figure out what they like to, problems they'd like to solve, then you can ask them, well, what skills will you need to solve these problems? What knowledge will you need? What experiences would help you? And then for what type of a study environment would you like? I mean, people have different preferences. Do they want to be on a big campus with lots of amenities? I mean, we have like universities in the United States can have 40,000, 50,000, 100,000 students. They can have huge campuses with movie theaters and pools and gymnasiums and everything. And that might be what some kids want. But then in those larger universities, oftentimes, especially the freshman courses, might be rather large. You might have 400, 500, 700 people occasionally in a course. Now, even in those big courses, I'll talk about this when I talk about the culture of being a student in the universities in the United States in my second presentation. They might break it down so they're smaller units within that course that are kind of helped or controlled or encouraged by a teaching assistant, but I'll talk about that the next presentation. So maybe they want a big campus with all these amenities. Maybe they want to be in an urban area, or maybe they want a small campus, small classes. Maybe they want to be out more in the rural area of the United States. I mean, it's all sorts of things that they should think about. Again, there are 5,300 plus universities and colleges in the US. The country itself, I mean, we have tropical environments, for example, in Hawaii, and that we have subtropical in Florida, and Southern California has Mediterranean climate. Maybe they want snow, so you're up in the north, all sorts of things. I mean, so even like what type of an environment climate-wise they would like to study in can also influence their choices. Okay. And again, economically, if you're in an urban environment, usually the universities, at least the cost of living might be higher than it would be if you're in a more rural environment. And then 5, what social or environmental aspects, as I mentioned, would you like? I mean, do you want to be in a rural environment, an urban or cosmopolitan location? What type of access will you need? Are they thinking of, getting a driver's license and getting a car? Or will they have to rely on public transit? I mean, in the United States, there's not a lot of public transit outside of the big cities. So, maybe they'll need to think about that too. And what would you like to do after completing your post-secondary education? What are your ultimate goals? And so these questions can help your student who is thinking about going abroad, going to the United States for studying, to think about maybe where they want to study, what program they might want to apply for, what university they might want to apply for. Okay, these are some suggestions. Application platforms. Now, in order to help standardized and streamlined application processes, coalitions of universities and colleges in the United States often use these shared platforms to receive and process applications. If each university had to do all of this on its own, it'd be very costly. So a lot of universities kind of agree, we'll use this platform, this system to accept applications through a university. For example, the Common Application. It's used by approximately 900 universities and colleges. Okay, you can Google this if you need to, the Common Application. The Coalition Application is used by approximately 150 universities and colleges. And the University of California System Application is used by about 9 UC campuses in California. Now let's look at one example. I want to try to give you some examples here. The Common Application, used by about 900 universities in the US. You can find their website on, very easily if you just Google it. And then they would use this. You would have to set up, your student would have to set up an account with them. And then they would go through and they can even explore the different colleges that use the system. They can find, for example, this was my undergraduate college was the University of Portland. I'm not trying to say, oh, go there. But anyway, I just want to use an actual college. So I figured university. So I figured, okay, I study at the University of Portland for my undergraduate. So I put in the name there to see what would happen. And then I get information about the university, I can start to kind of do a little research through their system. And again, then, okay, I click on University of Portland. There it is, and they get information about the university. And so it's actually pretty good also for a student to maybe get into the system, register, and then they can use it to help them as they do their exploration of different universities and different possible places for them to study. So, if they want to, they go and they create an account, they go to Common Application, they click Start on your application, they add user information, their name, email, phone number, etc. They fill out the user profile. They'll want to know a little bit about you, about the student. Details on their education, what level they have, any extracurriculars they're involved in, demographic data, also like where they're from. And a little bit of household information and more. So they should have that information kind of ready to put in. And then they will add high school teachers and others who are providing letters of recommendation. We'll talk more about letters of recommendation later, or other documents that support it. And then they can search for and add to a list of my colleges. And what's nice is if they get a certain number, well, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they can just apply to all of those with one application. So it makes life a lot easier, I think, for the student who's trying to apply for universities. And again, this is just one of several of these platforms, but I wanted to show this to you so you get an idea that there are places that students can go to not only get information about the possible universities and college, but also to apply to a multitude of colleges through one system. I'm not trying to endorse any program or any system. I'm just trying to give you information so that you can help your students. And then here are some examples. The application essays. Essays are always, of course, a big part of the application process in most cases. And I wanted to just give you some examples from the application essays, personal statements. And these are actually from the University of California online application system. This is a little different because they actually prompt. They give you prompts, or the student prompts, the applicant prompts, so that they can write these prompts. Now, what do I mean? Just a few. I'm not going to go through all of these. For example, you could describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, da, 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 da. You know, so you can see here, there are 8 prompts that they want their applicants for the UC, University of California system, to respond to. And I want to point out, when you are setting up these, when the student is actually getting ready to go into and respond to these prompts, notice how often certain words are mentioned. You know, describe an example of leadership experience. So, okay, give an actual example. Don't just say, I think I'm a great leader, but okay, prove, show us an example. Give us an example of when you actually showed leadership. Creative side, I know, how do you express, you know, so actually, again, give it, you know, oh, I paint, I write music, I play music, I like poetry, I do this. How do you express your creative side? Not just what you like, but how do you show that liking by doing things? Oh, I like to paint, and I made 3 oil paintings recently, and you know, things like that. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated? Again, demonstration. How did you develop? What did you do? And then how did you demonstrate it? Give an example. Describe you have taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity. Okay, maybe you had a chance to go, you know, for example, a student could say they had a chance to do a study abroad or an exchange overseas for a week or 2 or something. What did they do with that opportunity? How did they prepare for it? What did they do when they were in that opportunity to show that they really wanted to get as much out of it as they could? Maybe they volunteered to give a talk at a local high school about, you know, Japan, or maybe they showed an elementary class how to do origami. I mean, show something. And then, or maybe they had an educational barrier. You know, this is another thing. You know, maybe there was an issue the kid had. They don't need to get too personal, but maybe there was a problem or an issue or a challenge that they had in their education, and that they successfully overcame it. Okay. And again, don't need to get too private or personal, but you know, they want to see growth, they want to see development, they want to see that this person is able to, you know, adjust and grow and deal with, you know, being a college student in another country. It's basically what we're trying to show, that your students are capable of being. Describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. Again, example, example, example. The steps you have taken to overcome the challenge. It could be anything. Maybe they needed to get a certain score in a test. Maybe they were having trouble with a math class. Maybe they're having trouble with an English class, a science class. Maybe they were, you know, wanted to join a club or something, but they needed to show that they were capable athletically or this. And what did they do? What steps did they take? And then 6, think about an academic subject that inspires you. Describe how you have furthered this interest inside or outside of the classroom. For example, you know, maybe they love history. Maybe they're really into history. And so they don't just want to read history, but they want to go visit historical monuments, and they want to see things. Maybe they have a great interest, for example, in Japanese history. So they want to go to see Himeji-jo, you know, the Himeji Castle. They want to visit Tokyo. They've gone to Kyoto. They've gone to museums. They talk about things that really take the study, for example, of history outside of the classroom and really involves their whole life in that study or that process. It could also be physical education, mathematics, any number of subjects. And then 7, what have you done to make your school or community a better place? This is where, again, an example. Maybe they started a club. Maybe they started a program to help tutor students who are having trouble. Who knows? But, and again, an example of how they have tried to make their school, high school, or they could even look back at junior high or even elementary school. How have they made it a better place? Or their community? Maybe there was a situation, well, up in Akita here, where I am now, we have lots of snow, and maybe they decided that, well, they're elderly people and they're not able to shovel the snow for their driveway or their walkway up to their house, and so maybe they got a group of fellow students together and they volunteer to go and help out elderly homeowners by shoveling their driveway or shoveling their walkway, or people who might be suffer from handicaps are able to help. That's just an example. I'm just trying to give you an example of maybe how somebody has helped their community. Okay. And 8, beyond what has already been shared in your application, what do you believe makes you stand out? And this is where, humility is wonderful, and you don't want to use hyperbole in your application. You don't want to exaggerate, but it's okay to be proud of things you've done. And so this is where the student should be encouraged to kind of think about themselves and think, okay, what can I do that would be different than other people may be applying, or how can I benefit the university, the program that I might want to join? So tell them, humility is important, but in this case, they should really be willing to be proud of something, an ability they have, or a skill, or something that will allow them to be a successful college student or university student at that program. Okay, so again, humility is wonderful, but in this case, a little bit of pride, as long as it's not exaggeration or hyperbole, is appropriate. And again, I just want to explain, these are things they need to think about. Describe, describe how, what would you say is, describe how, describe that, describe how, what have you done? What do you believe makes you stand out? I mean, these, action, think about it. They've got to put in some good detail here. Descriptions, examples, all of that. I think most people who are going to be reading these essays are thinking, well, I want to know this person. I want to understand who this individual is who is applying to come to our university. So make sure that your students are willing to give the time necessary to really talk about themselves in depth. And okay, and understanding the prompts. Again, I'm just using this as an example. This is from the UC system, but prompts 1 and 7 are about students' engagement with people, things, and ideas around them. Okay. They should think about the impact of the outside world on you and how you handle that impact. Okay. Prompts 2 and 6 are about the inner self. Students should think about what defines them and what makes them the persons they have become. They should think about the contents of their character and what makes them who they believe that they are. This deals with the inner person. And then prompts 3, 4, 5, and 8 are about achievement. Students should think about what they have accomplished in life and what they are proud of doing. All right. Now, the essay length, typically about 350 words, is the limit for each of those prompts. So about 1 and 1 1/3 type double-spaced pages. So quite extensive, actually. Okay, but something they need to think about. This is an example of an application, a letter that somebody was asked to write. It was not on a system where they had to respond to prompts. Instead, they were just asked to write a letter about themselves. So you can see here, okay, you've got a young person, mention the name, tells them about them. Okay, in this case happens to be a dual US and Japanese citizen, bilingual, studied in the Middle East, USA, Japan, okay, living in London, why they want to study at this LIM, and then just kind of goes through, talks about who the individual is, why they want to study at the start, and then talks about, okay, the next paragraph talks about their interest in fashion, because this, I guess, program is very much involved in fashion, fashion business, fashion, developing fashions, clothing, all of that. And so then the person kind of talks about themselves, where they've been, what they've done. where they've traveled, and then about their education. Okay, went to a community college in Michigan for about a year, and then talks about some of the challenges that he or she has had. And then they talk at the last paragraph about why this program would be good for them to study in. Okay, that just gives you an idea here. Okay, so the essays, I hope you understand. The essays are an opportunity for the student to really show the university who they are. And they should be willing to be open. They should be willing to give examples. They should be willing to be honest, but also proud about themselves and their accomplishments. Okay. And now the next thing, again, this is kind of a practical presentation. I'm talking about transcripts. Japanese language transcripts will need to be translated into English. Okay, they will need to be translated. Sometimes they will need to be done professionally. It depends on the university. Sometimes the school itself, many schools are fully capable of having a transcript translated, but just having it translated might not be enough. A Japanese high school transcript is different than an American high school transcript, and even the grading systems are often different. So the transcript will then need to be interpreted or compared formally with the usual US high school curriculum and grading system. Universities, colleges in the US will tell you which company you need to, maybe they'll give you a choice of 2 or 3 or 4, and then there are companies that their job is to interpret the transcripts from all over the world in such a way that an American high school, American university or college can see what the person has studied and what their grade would be if it was kind of the American system. So again, how much does it cost? Well, it varies like everything. It's not a fortune, but it's not cheap either, but it's something that will need to be done. And again, the young scholar who's applying to go abroad to study in the United States will have to check the system there, and they'll be open to the website, or they can communicate with the registrar or what have you. And the transcript will need to be interpreted. Which company should you use, or which set of companies? And the company will send usually the interpretation of the transcript directly to the university, and also maybe a copy to the student, him or herself, in Japan. And then again, they'll be open with you about which companies they want you to use. So just make sure that this needs to be done. And it should be done as soon as the transcript is ready. I mean, they've finished high school, they're ready to go, and they have all the grades there. And then you translate it to English, and then you can send it to the company of choice for the university to have it interpreted. Okay, this is always a big question about standardized test scores and language assessments. When your student is planning on applying for university in the United States, what types of assessment should they prepare to take as part of their application? All right, typically you will need probably, if it's the United States, the test of English as a foreign language, the TOEFL test. Now, the TOEFL ITP test, there is now a TOEFL online test. You can also take the IBT test. But usually the TOEFL is required. Now, some universities might also accept the IELTS test. It is changing, especially because of the pandemic. Some universities have kind of stepped away from demanding these assessments because of the pandemic and issues with that. But traditionally, most universities in the United States have asked for the Scholastic Assessment Test, the SAT, and or the American College Testing, ACT test. Okay. Now, there are universities and colleges that are test optional with this. Prior to the pandemic, there were approximately 1,000 US four-year colleges and universities. They had test optional policies in relation to the SAT and ACT test. However, almost all of them still required proof of English proficiency. So maybe a TOEFL or maybe an IELTS test. So I again encourage research on this is important, is schedules for these tests overseas require registration. They might require travel to a testing site. Have your student check with those universities and colleges he or she might be interested in to find out what tests are necessary for the application. And a little bit of advice. There are programs that do not require prior taking of the ACT, SAT, or TOEFL. For example, many community colleges, I'll talk about those later, don't require an ACT, an SAT, or even a TOEFL test necessarily to begin studying there. But again, you have to check. And then some ESL programs taken before full university involvement. These are ESL programs that are sponsored by the university, that are kind of associated with the university in a direct or contractual way. They might allow you to come and study English, and you don't need to take your TOEFL test yet. But of course, before you actually go into full enrollment in the university, you might then need to submit a TOEFL score as well as ACT or SAT or whatever their assessment they might demand of you. Again, research is important. Just to give you an idea, SAT, ACT, these are tests that are offered internationally. So a young student could take these tests in Japan in most cases. For example, the SAT is offered 7 times per year around the world. And there are 31 test locations in Japan for the next scheduled test. So they would have to check the website and test to find dates. And I just checked them actually this morning for the next test. And a lot of the test centers were already filling up. So you need to make sure that your student applies ahead of time. And I would encourage them to sign up more than once if they can, because oftentimes, no matter how well they prepare, the first time you take an assessment is a point of exploration. And, you know, they're nervous, the first time they take it. So I do encourage them to try, if they can, to take these tests more than one time. It's usually perfectly fine. There might be some requirements about how many months need to be between the test times and all of that. Again, research is important, but if they take the test, I have a personal experience with a young scholar who needed to take the IBT test, TOEFL IBT test, and for a variety of reasons, really wasn't able to prepare a lot ahead of time for the first time she took the test. She was, however, very fluent in English. She graduated from a high school in the United States, and so she was rather confident she could take the test. Did not do well the first time, because it was a new experience. And of course, these tests, language tests, especially, you know, they don't test like your everyday English. They're looking for academic English. And so this young scholar, first test didn't go so well. She signed up for another test, prepared a little bit more, and because she knew what to expect, she did very well on the second test. So, you know, if they can, try to take the test more than once. That's just some advice, okay? ACT or SAT, it depends on the university, okay? Some will say you can take either one of them. Some of them will favor one of them or the other. I think my undergraduate, when I went, what did I have to take? ACT, I think. But, you know, it varies, right? And by the way, the fact that I had to take the ACT or SAT when I started my undergraduate shows you that these tests have been around for a very, very long time. Okay, they're kind of part of the higher education culture in the United States. But again, some universities are now stepping away from them for a variety of reasons, pandemic and others. They also recommend taking, there are some educators I will want to point out, some. This is somewhat, you know, I take it for what it is. I just want you to be aware of this. There are some educators who recommend that students take the TOEFL first. Okay, if they haven't taken these sorts of assessments, have them take the TOEFL first, some say, first to prepare for the ACT and the SAT. Because, you know, okay, they'll hear academic English, kind of get used to that. And then also, again, it's just kind of, I've heard this, also sometimes some educators have recommended taking the ACT first and maybe the SAT second for a variety of reasons. Again, take those with a grain of salt. These are things that I just understand from other educators about suggestions that they make to their young scholars thinking of studying in the United States. Again, it's whatever they can arrange, but these are a few recommendations that I have heard in the past. Okay, now resources for finding a university or college and preparing for study. There are a lot of resources out there. In some ways, there's almost an overwhelming amount of information online. I do encourage all of your students who are thinking of going abroad to study to do research on the universities that they are interested in. But if you need to send them to a place to start, maybe I would recommend Education USA. This is sponsored by the United States Department of State. So it's got government sponsorship here. And it talks about what they can expect in the United States as a college student. It talks about the steps they will need to go through as they prepare to apply, and once they're accepted, what they need to do to go to the United States, because there are lots of things, for example, visas. I'm not going to talk about visas and that, but they will need to be aware of the visa that they will need to get to study in the United States. So make sure that they have a look, at least have a look at this website. This will help them. You know, they also sponsor events in different locales around the world, oftentimes associated with American embassies, where people can come and they can ask questions and learn about studying in the United States. So I do encourage you to encourage your young scholars, your young students, your high school students to explore, and if they need a place to start, this is a good website for them. It's full of information. I will endorse this because, again, it's sponsored by the United States Department of State. The information will be regularly updated, of course, with the pandemic and things. All sorts of things with visas over the last 2 years have been, been changing this way and that way. So again, doing research is important, and this is a good website for you to send your young scholars, your high school students to. Let me talk about letters of recommendation in general, but also because maybe you will be asked to write a letter of recommendation. I write a lot of these for my young scholars because I work at the university level. A lot of them need recommendations because they want to go to graduate school, for example. But I would offer this advice: encourage the students to obtain letters or recommendations from those who really know them and can speak to specific examples of their special qualities and abilities. A teacher who knows them, a counselor who knows them, a coach who knows them. It doesn't always need to be, although they might ask that it be a teacher, but if they don't specify it, maybe a kid has a coach who knows him or her really well. Maybe they've been in the baseball or kendo club, and so what adult, and we're excluding family members, of course, and others, fathers, others, uncles and aunts, but what adult really knows the individual, the kid, the student, and can really speak to that kid's abilities? Then if you are asked to write a letter of recommendation, do your research on the student, okay? Just, you don't want to be general with these. You want to give specific examples to bolster your recommendation of these students. So, and maybe you taught the kid a year or two ago, we all have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of students. So maybe it's fair to ask them, okay, can you, sit down with them for a little bit, or maybe ask them to send you a few things that they've been involved in, special projects or events or activities, that helps you kind of add to your letter in a way that will make a more compelling case that the university should accept the student. And a few basics. You start the letter typically with and again, now I'll mention this later, some universities, colleges now have kind of a form online that you fill out where you respond to prompts. That's a little easier, I think, but if not, then you might need to write a letter. And so begin the letter with an introduction of who you are, your background, and importantly, how you know the student and for how long. That's significant. Oh, this kid was in my class, my math class, my English class. I've known them for 2 years, those sorts of things. And then give a general overview of the student's academic aptitude, work ethic, classroom involvement. Like, what have they done? What have they done? And then offer 1 or 2 specific examples of behavior, engagement, activities, or work that help bolster your assessment from section 2, where you said, oh, the kid's, really good scholar, excellent work ethic. Well, prove it by giving some examples, okay? And then end by offering your own assessment of the student's ability to succeed in the program to which he or she is applying. Okay, that's important. And I also encourage you to be as specific as possible. Don't be general. Oh, good kid. Yes, thumbs up. No, mention specific things that he or she has done, ways that you can kind of certify that they're a good scholar, a good student, grades maybe from your class, things like that. Again, the kid has asked you to write a letter of recommendation, and he or she is trying to get into this university, and the university is going to pay very close attention to what you have to say, because you know the student, you're a witness to the kid's ability. And make sure you mention the name of the university and the program, if at all possible, because I think, you don't want a generic letter of recommendation. Maybe the student will ask for one, but if possible, tell them, okay, tell me which university, tell me which program. And then that's good. Then people, universities, anybody, any company or that, they get a letter. It's good if you have mentioned the company, mentioned the university and all of that in the letter of recommendation. Importantly, be completely honest and truthful. This is not the time to exaggerate or give false impressions. What do you really think about the kid's ability to study at the university level in the United States? If you do not feel for any reason that you can give a supportive letter recommendation, let the student know and ask him or her to seek out another person to write the letter. Maybe you taught them too many years ago, and you don't really know that person that well anymore. You can tell them, listen, I had you in my class 3 years ago, and maybe you should get somebody who has recently taught you. I mean, it's up to you, but I just, sometimes you just need to be honest and say, I think somebody else could provide you with a more up-to-date recommendation. And now, as I said, many universities now use an online submission for letters of recommendation. So you may need to type in or cut and paste information onto a website. Cut and paste is very good if they let you do that. So if it is possible, then you can kind of type up things ahead of time and cut and paste your responses. But that's not always the case. And I often encourage people to keep a digital template. I keep a template, with my contact information, signature and everything, and then the heading on a digital copy of my university stationery. So it's easier than for me to kind of like put in and fill in the blanks there. And I've written dozens upon dozens of letters, so it's something I'm just used to doing. But if you're not used to doing it, once you go through the process once, hold on to that as a template so you understand how you can approach it in the future. It'll save you time, and that's important too. Teachers are, you guys are overworked, I know that. So if we can save you some time, that would be excellent, okay? I'm just going to give you an example here. Again, this is more for you to graduate school, but if you notice, okay, first I kind of introduce myself and I explain a little bit about the individual, how long I've known them, 3 years. I've talked about where the kids studied, what grade they got in the class I taught in this case him. I talk a little bit about their abilities, fluent in Japanese and English. I talk about instrumental in bringing a program to Akita, TEDx, that was significant. So again, trying to show specifics. And then I always kind of end in a very positive way. And I also encourage them, if they want, although to contact me. Okay. And again, I just kind of made that up with a student, but that gives you an idea of what you can do as far as preparing. And then I mentioned Education USA, a U.S. Department of State network, 430 advising centers in more than 175 countries and territories. I want to talk a little bit about this only because I want you to be aware that you can go to this site and your student will be able to help. This will be able to help your student again. I want to reemphasize this, a little more information there. And then from their website, we learned that they can give in-person or virtual advice on these things also. And so that's significant, going back to that. The admissions process, financing, visa processes, preparation for departure to the US, etc. I want to talk about community colleges just briefly. Community colleges are 2-year colleges in the US. And why would I recommend them? Well, many have associations with 4-year universities. So after you complete 2 years at the community college, you can then transfer completely to a 4-year university, and then you only need to put in 2 years at that 4-year university. Now, why is that significant? Because typically, and again, it depends on location and all this, the cost for going to a community college is lower, sometimes significantly lower, meaning half or even 1/3 the price from a 4-year university. So if cost is a factor, that can be very beneficial. And also typically class size is smaller. And again, depends on the situation, but again, they have what we call open enrollment. So it's well, I just want to say it's usually easier for a person to transition into a community college than it would be for a 4-year university. Community colleges also, I think, have a lot of diversity in the student population. They have people who are coming back to college, people who might have been out of college, out of schooling for years. You know, maybe they went to high school 15 years ago and decided, hey, I want to go to college now. It's a good opportunity for, so it's a very diverse, often, student population. Some community colleges, not all of them, but some do have dormitories as well. Some of them have ESL programs, foundational programs to help your young student get ready for university. So there are lots of opportunities there. So I just think that, you know, have them explore the community colleges too. It could be cheaper, class sizes could be smaller, and they might have all the programs they need to get their start. And then they can transition if they want, because you can also just finish with an associate's degree, 2-year degree, or they can then decide to go on for a 4-year degree. It's up to them, but it's something I wanted to mention as a possibility. All right, these are my references. Thank you for your attention during this presentation. As I said, I went through and I tried to talk to you about the nuts and bolts of applying for university entrance, college entrance in the United States. There are lots of complexities, but I hope through this presentation, I've kind of shared with you a few things. You now know about application platforms. You know something about the application essays. You know about transcripts and how those need to be dealt with. You know about standardized test scores and language assessments that they might be asked to provide. I've talked to you in some depth about letters of recommendation, and also about resources for finding a suitable university or college. And then finally, community colleges is a possible option for them to think about. Thank you very much for your attention. My next presentation is going to talk more about the culture of being that a student will encounter when they go to a typical American college or university environment. We'll talk about what it's like to be in classes. We'll talk about what it's like to maybe, you know, live in a dorm, be part of a campus community, maybe getting part-time jobs, all sorts of things. So anyway, that will be the next presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I have enjoyed my time with you today.